Welcome to the Corrivitas Inflammatory Bowel Disease Drug Safety and Effectiveness Registry Protocol Training. At Corrivitas, we advance patient care by generating real-world insights into health conditions and therapeutics, and we apply cutting-edge scientific methods to generate robust, real-world evidence and insights. We do this through demonstrating our core values, which are diversity. We value human diversity and strive to create an environment that is just, equitable, and inclusive. Passion. We believe deeply in who we are and what we do to advance patient care. Integrity. We are open, honest, and ethical. Collaboration. We put team ahead of individual. And innovation. We challenge the status quo and believe that the best idea wins. The agenda that will be covered in this presentation include the following topics: registry design, the informed consent process, subject ID assignment, an overview of the data collection forms, follow-up visits, medication capture, drug safety and TAE reporting, data best practice submission guidelines, and reimbursement. We will begin by looking at registry design. This is a prospective observational research study for patients with inflammatory bowel disease under the care of a gastroenterologist. Approximately 10,000 patients and 150 clinical sites in North America will be recruited to participate with no defined upper limit for either target. Our goal is to prospectively study the natural history of IBD, as well as the real-world effectiveness and safety of IBD medications and any patterns of drug utilization treatment. Corrivitas's robust data collection from investigator sites ensures the highest quality of documenting disease-specific measures and outcome data. Validated clinician and patient-reported outcomes are collected consistently across a number of domains. The investigator network collects structured data at defined regular time points on varying topics, including disease activity, comorbidities, medication use, and safety outcomes. Regulatory-grade safety data from Corrivitas has supported successful submission to U.S. regulatory authorities. This data is collected using 3 standardized data collection forms: provider forms, which are used to obtain the medical information that is collected at both enrollment and follow-up visits; patient forms, which are collected from patients at both enrollment and follow-up visits; and targeted safety event forms, which are collected from investigative site staff during or between visits. Disease measures and structured clinical data are collected from patients and providers at the time of routine clinical encounters using the standardized data collection forms provided by Corrivitas. Relevant standard of care laboratory and imaging results are expected to be reported when available. Active screening for any serious or non-serious adverse events since the subject's last Corrivitas visit must be conducted throughout their participation in the registry. These events include, but are not limited to, things like new or worsening comorbidities, drug toxicities, infections, and pregnancy events. At enrollment, the goal of the provider assessments is to collect as thorough of a medical history as is possible. The goal at the subsequent follow-up visits is to capture any IBD-related changes the subject has experienced since they were last examined from the perspective of the registry. To participate in the registry, a patient must meet all the following criteria. They must have been diagnosed with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis by a gastroenterologist. They must be at least 18 years of age or older, and they must be willing to provide personal information. Eligible patients must also meet one of the following sets of conditions at the time of enrollment. If the patient has a diagnosis of ulcerative colitis, there are 2 scenarios in which they could be eligible. If they have never taken a biologic or small molecule medication, so they have no past exposure to either drug type, and they have either started taking a new eligible immunosuppressant medication within the 12 months prior to the enrollment visit, or they are prescribed or starting a new eligible immunosuppressant medication at the enrollment visit, they would be eligible. Alternatively, if they have either started taking a new eligible biologic or eligible small molecule medication within the 12 months prior to the enrollment visit, or they are prescribed or starting a new eligible biologic or eligible small molecule medication at the enrollment visit, they would also be eligible. If the patient has a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, there is only one scenario in which they could be eligible. If they are prescribed or starting a new eligible biologic or eligible small molecule medication at the enrollment visit, they would be eligible. In all of these scenarios, a new medication is a medication that the patient has never taken before. A complete list of qualifying medications by drug type can be found in the Eligible Medications Appendix of the Registry Protocol. Please note that switching to a different formulation of the same medication qualifies as a new medication under these criteria. For example, switching from Xeljanz to Xeljanz XR qualifies as a new medication. Switching from an originator to a biosimilar or to another brand of biosimilar also qualifies as a new medication. So switching from Remicade to Renflexis or switching from Renflexis to Inflectra would qualify as new medications as well. In terms of exclusion criteria, if a patient is participating or planning to participate in a double-blind randomized trial for an IBD drug, they would not be able to participate in the registry. With that being said, concurrent participation in another observational registry or open-label phase 3B or 4 trial is allowed. As mentioned, a complete list of qualifying medications by drug type can be found in the Eligible Medications appendix of the registry protocol. This list is updated regularly as new medications are FDA approved for the treatment of IBD. The brand names included on this list may not be comprehensive, and other brand names may apply. Next, we will discuss the informed consent process. Eligibility must be verified prior to the patient signing the consent form. Please be sure to conduct the informed consent process using the most current IRB-approved consent form. The subject must personally sign and date the informed consent form, and a copy of the signed and dated consent document must be provided to the subject. All pages of the original signed and dated consent document should then be saved with the patient's registry file. Utilizing an e-consent platform is also acceptable if it is supported by your facility. Moving on to subject ID assignment. Each consented IBD registry patient will be assigned a unique 11-digit subject ID number at their enrollment visit. The numbers follow the table provided here. The first 4 digits of the subject ID will be the 4-digit site number assigned by Corrivitas for the IBD registry. This will always start with a 6. The next 3 digits will be the unique 3-digit provider ID number assigned by Corrivitas for each registry provider. The last 4 numbers will be assigned chronologically by the site for each patient enrolled, where the first patient is 0001, the second is 0002, and so on. When combined, these 3 elements make up the final 11-digit ID number. Please note that if a patient who was enrolled by one provider is seen by a different provider for a follow-up visit, their subject ID number will not change. From here, let's go through an overview of the data collection forms. Subject enrollment and follow-up forms must be completed by the patient using the IRB-approved forms provided by Corrivitas. When the subject form is completed on paper, study personnel are responsible for transcribing the data recorded by the patient into the EDC, ideally within 5 business days and no later than 90 days from the encounter date. If the data is not entered within that 90-day period, the visit will no longer be eligible for payment. Study personnel should review patient responses for completeness. The provider enrollment, follow-up, and laboratory and imaging results forms display and define all required assessment and data elements that must be collected for the registry at the time of routine clinical encounters. If all of the assessments and other data collected in the provider enrollment and follow-up forms are already collected in your site's electronic medical records, the data can be recorded directly in the EDC system at the time of the registry visit. If not, the data from the provider forms should again be transcribed into the EDC, ideally within 5 business days and no longer than 90 days from the encounter date. 3 additional forms are collected only at the enrollment visit: the data linkage form, the personal information form, and the medical records authorization form. The data from these forms are entered into the Honest Broker EDC, which is separate from the clinical EDC and is properly protected to ensure PII is secure and patient privacy is maintained. Telemedicine can also be used to support research data collection. Telemedicine involves the use of technology, such as a phone or video call, to provide long-distance clinical care and is often referred to as virtual care. IBD registry virtual data collection applies when the clinician-reported outcomes and other clinical assessments in the provider form are obtained by phone or video call, and the data on the subject form is obtained by interviewing the patient over the phone or by video call. If a patient who is seen in person chooses to complete their subject form remotely and later returns the completed form by fax, email, or postmail, it does not qualify as virtual data collection, although this is an acceptable method for collecting the data. Some assessments that are included in the provider forms either cannot be performed virtually or have restrictions when done over the phone or by video call. This is a list of such assessments, the data for which are only required as specified when collected via a virtual visit. Next, we will look at the 3 additional forms that are only collected at enrollment. The data linkage form documents patient eligibility and data linkage. The form must be completed by site staff. It is a protocol-mandated procedure, so it must be completed in order for the enrollment visit to receive payment. In the event the patient needs to exit the registry and chooses to withdraw their personal information from the data linkage program, the gray boxes at the bottom of the form would be completed and entered into the Honest Broker EDC. The personal information form must be completed by the patient using the IRB-approved form provided by Correvitas. If the personal information form is completed on paper, study personnel must transcribe the information into the Honest Broker EDC. Completion of the personal information form is also a required element of the enrollment visit. The minimum personal identifiable information that is required is full legal name, sex, date of birth, and zip code. The other fields can be left blank if the subject chooses. The medical records authorization form is also collected at enrollment. However, it is optional and patients are not required to participate. The purpose of this form is to allow the Honest Broker database to be engaged to support retrieval of proper source documentation in the case there is an adverse event for which the site is not able to retrieve the relevant records. As a best practice, sites should be proactively collecting a medical authorization form from their enrolled patients to allow the site to retrieve relevant hospital records. For example, in the event that the subject experiences a serious adverse event during their participation in the registry. The medical records authorization form allows Honest Broker to act in the same capacity if the site is unable to retrieve the necessary medical records. Site personnel only need to complete the header and the patient will fill in the remainder of the form. A copy of the completed form must then be provided to the patient. Moving on to follow-up visits. Registry follow-up visits should be conducted approximately every 6 months at the time of routine gastroenterology office visits when the patient's standard of care evaluation schedule permits. Routine or standard of care clinical encounters may occur in between 2 registry visits, but the data collected for each follow-up visit must cover the entire time period since the last registry visit. Early follow-up visits may also be conducted in conjunction with routine clinical encounters if a sample is being collected at the visit for a subject who is also participating in the optional Correvitas Precision Medicine biorepository. Loss to follow-up is strictly defined as a situation where the last contact date for the subject has exceeded 18 months, or more than 540 days, and since the last contact date, the site has documented at least 3 outreach attempts, such as telephone or certified letter, to contact the subject, and despite the repeated attempts, the site is unable to confirm the subject's vital status, whether they are living or deceased. If the subject's vital status is known, but the subject fails to respond to the site's inquiries, this subject cannot be classified as lost to follow-up. When this occurs, the subject should be administratively exited only after consultation with a registry manager. If more than an 18-month period has elapsed without a registry visit or targeted event reported, and all reasonable attempts have been exhausted to establish contact with the patient, the site must exit the patient from the registry by completing a subject exit form and reporting any applicable targeted events on the appropriate targeted event form. Once a subject has been exited from the registry, regardless of the reason, the subject is not eligible for re-enrollment or continued participation in the registry at a later time. Each registry follow-up visit window is anchored to the date of the last eligible registry visit. In other words, the visit window calculation starts over each time an eligible registry visit is conducted. A follow-up visit is eligible for payment and considered a registry visit if one of the following are true. At least 150 days have passed since the last registry visit, or less than 150 days have passed since the last registry visit, and at the time of the follow-up visit, the patient meets one of the sets of inclusion criteria that were previously discussed. Next, let's look at medication capture. A complete record for each subject must be maintained for IBD medications that are prescribed or received during a patient's participation in the registry. A full IBD medication history is required at enrollment. At each follow-up visit, any new information or medication changes that occurred in the time period since the last registry visit should be captured. This includes biologics, immunosuppressants, 5-ASAs or mesalamine, steroids, and antibiotics prescribed for the treatment of IBD. A number of tips on medication capture for the IBD registry are provided on this slide. Reason codes must also be used when reporting a drug change at any registry visit. A table of reason codes can be seen here. Here's a medication capture example for an enrollment visit. Ms. Sommers sees her gastroenterologist and she is prescribed Xeljanz 5 mg BID. A prescription is written and the intent is that she will begin this drug within the next few weeks. An enrollment visit is completed as she meets the inclusion criteria and has never previously used this medication for the treatment of her IBD. Using the paper form, we will capture data from left to right. Based on this example, you would indicate the drug choice, indicate no prior use under history of prior use to enrollment, leave the date of use blank, notate the reason by using the appropriate code, indicate start under changes prescribed today, and properly record the dose and frequency in the prescribed today or current column. Since no loading dose was administered, you can indicate so under the question asking if a loading dose was administered. In the clinical EDC, the same information will be captured from top to bottom. Please note that because you will be choosing only the appropriate options, the form will appear slightly different as not every answer will be shown. However, the same elements will still be collected. Medication capture for follow-up visits follows the same format. Continuing the example, Ms. Sommers returns to the clinic on July 8th, 6 months and 7 days later, for her follow-up visit and reports her Xeljanz was in fact started on July 1st at the prescribed 5 mg BID. Data is again entered from left to right on the paper form. Here, you would indicate the drug choice, indicate started under changes made since the last Corrivitas visit, provide the date of use, confirm that no changes were made and the drug is in current use under changes prescribed today, and properly record the dose and frequency in the prescribed today or current column. Since no changes were made, the as of yesterday or past frequency column can be left blank. Lastly, no would be checked under the question asking, was the first dose administered at today's visit? And again, in the clinical EDC, the information is then captured from top to bottom. Moving on to drug safety event reporting. The objective of the registry is to create a cohort of IBD patients and subjects to study long-term safety and effectiveness of IBD treatments. Because the long-term understanding of safety and efficacy is still limited even after regulatory approval, enrollment and long-term follow-up of a large number of diverse real-world patients exposed to therapies of interest is important to understand safety and effectiveness. The observational structured data collected will be used to better characterize the natural history of the disease and to extensively evaluate the effectiveness and safety of medications approved for the treatment of IBD to support ongoing risk-benefit evaluation by drug manufacturers and regulators. As such, timeliness, completeness, and accuracy in completion and submission of registry forms are critical for drug safety surveillance purposes. All adverse events must be reported regardless of seriousness or relationship to therapy. Targeted events are adverse events of special interest per the registry protocol and are indicated with a flag on the provider follow-up form or on the subject enrollment and follow-up forms for pregnancy events. Corrivitas provides a resource in the appendix of the protocol titled Safety Reporting via Targeted Adverse Events and Pregnancy Event Forms, which lists the targeted events that are reportable in the registry. Targeted event forms are used to report any serious adverse events, pregnancy events, or other protocol-defined adverse events of special interest occurring during registry participation. Targeted events occurring during registry participation are to be followed and the targeted event forms updated throughout outcome resolution. A pregnancy event form is to be completed upon learning of a pregnancy that occurs at the time or after registry enrollment and updated throughout pregnancy outcome. Targeted adverse events and pregnancy events must be reported to Corrivitas as soon as possible after awareness, ideally within 24 hours, whether reported at or between registry follow-up visits. Adverse events of special interest and pregnancy events that occur in registry patients are collectively referred to as targeted events and are captured via either customized targeted adverse event forms or the pregnancy event form. These forms cover all of the events that meet the criteria for reporting as a serious adverse event or other adverse event of special interest that are reportable in a TAE form regardless of seriousness. Redacted or de-identified medical records that support confirmation of the reported event or diagnosis should also be submitted with the TAE or pregnancy event form once they are available. Pregnancies are events of special interest in the registry population as there is limited data available regarding exposures to systematic therapies during pregnancy and associated safety outcomes. In the event of planned or unplanned exposures, additional data may be helpful in identifying potential risks and better understanding and characterizing the comparative safety of various treatment options. Subjects may initially report a pregnancy via the subject enrollment or subject follow-up forms. A pregnancy event form should be completed by the site upon learning of a pregnancy or pregnancy-related outcome in a patient that has been enrolled in the registry. The initial form should be completed with any available details, including additional details regarding the pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes provided as updates become available. Supporting documentation should also be provided and may include hospitalization records for births and whether or not complications were reported. Supporting documentation may also include the results of any diagnostic testing performed to confirm or rule out a congenital abnormality, birth defect, or adverse pregnancy outcome, particularly those impacting the mother or fetus. Death is also an important outcome in the registry, and it is very important to capture as much information as possible regarding drug exposures through date of death, in addition to the death date, primary cause of death if it is known, and any associated adverse events. These are important data for safety analyses. The corresponding TAE forms for the primary cause of death and other adverse events associated with death should be completed in detail, and source documents are to be submitted, including autopsy reports and death certificates. Any known targeted events that occurred since the last completed registry follow-up visit should also be reported using the appropriate targeted event forms. Death is an event outcome and should not be reported as an event term unless the cause of death is unknown. The general serious TAE form should be used to report deaths when cause is not known. If the cause of death becomes known after the date of the initial report, the TAE form should be revised to reflect the specific diagnosis that resulted in death. Even for subjects who are exited from the study for reasons other than death, any targeted events occurring prior to the subject exiting the registry are to be reported to Correvitas. Targeted event forms are to be updated as new information becomes available to the site and followed and updated through event resolution. Next, let's review data best practice submission guidelines. For enrollment and follow-up forms, sites should enter data directly into the EDC systems at the time of the registry visit or within 5 business days of the encounter date. For targeted adverse event and pregnancy event forms, data should be entered as soon as a registry staff member is made aware of the event, ideally within 24 hours of awareness. For subject exit questionnaires, sites should enter data directly into the EDC system at the time of the registry visit or within 5 business days of the encounter date. The only exception is if the subject is being exited due to death, in which case the data should be entered as soon as a registry staff member becomes aware of the event along with the associated TAE. Finally, we will look at reimbursement. A registry visit is deemed eligible for payment when the following conditions are met. The subject was deemed eligible for enrollment, payment for the visit was not previously executed, the visit falls within the protocol-defined visit window, data entry for both the provider and subject forms was completed and entered into the EDC within 90 days of the date the visit was conducted, the minimum subject PII was properly recorded into the Honest Broker EDC, and the visit completion page was populated and signed. Additionally, a best practice would be to ensure that all data queries are responded to and any erroneous data is corrected. Registry visits are paid on a quarterly payment cycle, and all registry visits must be entered into the EDC systems by the last day of the final month of the quarter in order to be eligible for payment in the following month. The reimbursement breakdown is as follows. Enrollment visits are paid $800, follow-up visits are paid $400, completed targeted adverse event forms are paid $100, and an additional $200 is paid when supporting documentation is submitted. Subject exits are paid $15, and patients also receive a $25 stipend in the form of an electronic gift card for each registry enrollment and follow-up visit. When requested, IBD registry managers will provide each site with a gift card log containing electronic links that can be shared with patients. Thank you for your time and attention throughout this training. For all inquiries and communication with the Corevitas IBD team, please reach out to ibd@corevitas.com.